Thank you so much, Arts Admin, for hosting us tonight, and for all of you who have joined us. It's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you both, Ankie and Julian. So Julian Maynard Smith, as I guess most of you know, is the director of Station House Opera, and Ankie Krijbolder is an architect and musician. Station House Opera, you've pioneered telematic theatre, linking artists and audiences through real-time video streaming between multiple international locations. And Julian, you began to build your first machine designed to pan across walls, like we see in the video, in 2010, where you made a piece connecting the roundhouse with your kitchen. And since you've also been experimenting with the second kind of device we see in the video, which is superimposing two live feeds. And this you've been doing since 2011, and most notably through the public performances of Dissolved in 2014 and At Home in Gaza and London in 2018. So really, perhaps the culmination of these two devices that you use has been 10 years in gestation, and this particular machine is in its third generation, this motorized panning camera, which combines both forms. And this time, for the first time, in a non-live medium of having only recorded video, just you and 9 versions of yourself in Ankie, your ex-partner's living room, where you've both been shielding together during lockdown. And this is the first time you've collaborated. Is that so?
Indeed. 30-something years of tolerating each other, we finally got to work with each other. If that's the right word.
It is, yes. And we are perfect collaborators because Julian is very thorough and serious and perfectionistic, and I'm very... But it worked well together.
And can you tell us a little bit more about how the collaboration began?
Well, I mean, before this pandemic thing started, I had just received from Nick Sandiland, who built it, a machine that rotates a camera with great accuracy, and it's a sort of programmable moving camera machine that was indeed notionally to do a kind of a version of the piece that you were just talking about, which was projected, the projections pan across the room of the viewing space, a bit like a torch in a dark room, illuminating as it goes different parts of a distant room. Different space, and so I just got this lovely machine, and then lockdown happened, and I wanted to play with it anyway. But lockdown also sort of meant that we had to make sort of certain decisions, and I live basically on my own in my house, and Ankie lives essentially on her own in her house, and we thought, well, why don't we lock down together, as it were. So I would sort of, it's a slight cheat, but I would just get into my car and drive from one house to the other, and assume that this was one bubble, one living arrangement. And so that's what we did. And then we decided that we should do something with this machine, you know, other than just work out how it worked. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it was very tricky in the beginning because I had to operate this very sensitive computer, and I'm not so good with left and right. And then Julian was kind of dressing up and being different characters. I found it very difficult in the beginning. But yeah, eventually we got into the hang of it. But Julian would go home and he would do hours and hours of editing. So it took quite a while before I actually saw what we were doing and what the whole idea was.
Well, it was a full start. I mean, the first week we shot a a film, which turned out to be terrible. So we rethought and we thought, and that was when the dissolved technique sort of crept in. And with this sort of the control we had over the camera and the dissolved technique meant that we could move the camera around while having triple images or quadruple or 9 times images all kept together. So that was quite exciting because it opened up a kind of a possibility of exploring relationships between a single person and all their multiple personae. Because there was, in the first version that we threw away, there was, how many? 6? 6 different characters with different costumes, and that was just unbearable, and it wasn't very good. So in the end, we ended up with the idea of superimposing the image on top of a person, on top of a person, on top of a person. So you get maybe 3 versions of something, which when they coincide and they split, they're very separate. But also we had 3 characters, and so there's a constant play between the multiplicity of a single character and the interaction between the 3 different characters, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and Jules, you're by nature an ensemble performer. You feature in all your work, but as part of a company devising action together. And this is for the first time a solo work where you have been forced into a situation where you have to inhabit yourself throughout. And here we go, a revelation of 9 versions that we witness.
Well, I think it also, I mean, the fact of lockdown brings that to a head, really, that dealing with oneself and the sense that the world is confronted by an unknown threat, you know, so some kind of terrible fear that we had at the beginning of lockdown. Didn't know how bad it was, didn't know what was happening, the escalating death rate was terrifying.
I was getting letters from Matt Hancock, remember? I was getting text messages saying, prepare a suitcase for hospital. I mean, I wasn't ill, but you know, it's...
Well, that's because...
I had a transplant of my brother.
Yeah, so she was very vulnerable at being a transplant, and I'm just very old, and therefore I'm vulnerable to a degree. And so we had to be very careful, but lockdown does throw you back on yourself and your own resources. So having one character sort of splitting into 3 in 2 different ways is sort of, it's complex enough to generate lots of interactions, which could be sort of images of social interactions, but also how you feel about yourself when you're puzzling about your existence, you know, your sort of survival in your existence and in these sort of lockdown conditions. So.
But I think it was also the machine on the table, because the way the house is laid out with the 2 doors, so that was quite a nice scope of using the physical space for these different people to act out the variety of activities that you undertook.
And that's one thing, Ankie, we're always aware of the other side of that room, and also you behind the camera. We see your feet perhaps once, we hear your voice a couple of times, and the breath. I think we may have lost Julian and Ankie briefly. Oh, there you are. You're back.
Yes, we have an unstable connection apparently. Sorry, can you repeat that, Taghrid?
So yeah, I was saying that we're hyper aware of what the, you know, as you pan this, it's this meditative panning. We're aware of the other side of the living room, and what you're about to get up to on that other side, but also of Ankie behind the camera. We see you ever so briefly in that Zoom screen, and
My name is.
sorry.
No, continue.
Yeah, and we hear you, and we hear your breath, and at one point you say, "So how do you do it?" And that's the almost most self-referential moment we'll ever get in any of your works, Julian. But that comes out. Tell us a bit about that, Ankie.
Well, you know, obviously, I had no starring role, except my feet are in it at one point. Also did a lot of moving the table and make all the magic happen. And, you know, just curating the shots, really, that was very interesting. And another, I don't know if people may be too highbrow to pick up on the Eurovision Song Contest. That was actually my idea, wasn't it? To kind of really pin the performance in real life. And one thing that didn't happen was the European Song Contest, which Holland won last year. So it was going to be in Holland. And then a friend of mine sent some funny clips of the Icelandic entry to the song contest. And that was actually that dance Julian does in his raincoat. And if you Google the Icelandic Eurovision submission, you'll see that it's very lifelike, and it's a very funny clip. So that.
We lost what you last said, Ankie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back.
I just said that, you know, the Eurovision Song Contest and the clapping for carers were two events that really were particular to the period during which we did the film.
And it occurred to me that sound is almost the 11th player. You know, we've got 9 Julians and we've got 1 Ankie, and then the sound, I think, is so much more prominent than in any of your other works. And I wondered, you know, with very distinct and particular choices of, you know, whether it's the recognizable pieces of music, the Eurovision Song Contest that you mention, Ankie, to the breath, and I just wondered if this was intentional because of the non-live medium of video, or as an inevitable result of living with Ankie, who's a musician, and that perhaps music naturally and sound was inhabiting this new home.
Yeah, I think so. There's always music on there.
There's always music playing in this house. And we do make sounds, we do have music sometimes, but if we have music, it tends to be live. In a film, it seems perfectly reasonable to have music, and the music it's not mood music. I mean, it's a sort of the music. I think it's very concrete. I mean, it either kind of reflects something which actually physically happened, like the Eurovision thing, and then there's that kind of mad dance music.
Well, the mad dance music was very good because I have a Sonos, and I used to have an Italian Logic, so I have Italia Roma on it. And at one point during the filming, I switched it on, and this crazy boom thing came on. So, and that's kind of how we then used it for Julian's very good dancing.
I mean, we see throughout the teapots, the hammers, the chainsaws, the ladders, your games, your absurd chase games, the farce, the entrances and exits through doors and windows, as you know, these functional architectural portals. So Station House Opera. But here, you're at least the way I see it, you're seemingly most domestic. You're almost relishing in the pleasure of lockdown at the beginning. You know, for those with hermit tendencies, it was an absolute, you know, succession of happy days.
Yeah, but it goes rather pear-shaped after. I mean, let's be candid about this. Ankie and I had a very easy lockdown. We're in a comfortable situation, and in a big house. I don't know if you're hearing. It starts with somebody just rather enjoying having different kind of personae, of themselves, playing with themselves in a way, and then you can't bad side which comes creeping out after
and you really wanted it to have this medieval feel as well, because you have to talk a bit about the breugel and the painting of the Cocagne. In Dutch we call it Luilekkerland, where everything that you wish for suddenly appears, which we have in the film. Each character has this experience, one with the music, one with the meringues, one with being at a family event, and then the other side of that is the medieval violence with chains and swords and these sickles, whatever you call them. So that was really fun to kind of set that all up.
Yeah, you begin with the functional human acts of companionship, of drinking tea and a haircut, and then we're with you with this underlying tension of the manipulation and deceit that then manifests in the chainsaws and the destruction. And it's almost like one mode of consciousness leads to the other through these objects, through the destruction of the objects and the action, and ending in the destruction, the post-climax of the destruction of the living room.
Yes, and it's at that point that the cocaine scene comes. After the total destruction, the three characters are left in their own fantasy land where things just appear the way that you want them, which is a sort of the end, really, apart from then suddenly the clapping thing starts in the street outside, which brings us back to, the actual situation. Because up till then, it's been very internalized. There's very little outside reference, apart from Eurovision and, and so on, bits and pieces. Maybe the music provides an outside reference, chunks of,
Because the French song was that's just a funny song.
Well, the French song happens during the blind man's buff scene, where the two primary characters are sort of like teasing the blind man, who is a kind of a bit of a primal and uncivilized kind of character who's wandered in from the garden. I don't quite know where he's from, and he's the one clanking chains around. So Blind Man Buff is teasing him, taking the piss really of this guy, and the song is by Georges Brassens saying, "What is it? When you're a cunt, you're a cunt," or it's really a real put down song of saying, well, you can't help it if you're a dickhead, whatever,
And in a way, I mean, with that character in particular, that version, it just felt so much more torturous than your usual work and your way of working. Like even the destruction was more visceral and cruel. I don't know if that's because you weren't in a performance space. You were in a place where you didn't have to think about health and safety permissions, and you literally did whatever you wanted. And because maybe who you were trying to destroy was yourself and not another performer, so there's always some kind of inhibition. But there's a particular shift that I wondered if you could talk about that cruelty.
Well, I'm quite like that really inside. I am very self-flagellating. I don't give myself an easy time. And I don't know what, I mean, I think there is something deeply, well, Ankie says I'm a perfectionist, but at the same time, another word for that is kind of obsessionally kind of trying to control your immediate surroundings and so on. So instead of being an outwardly sociable, happy-go-lucky kind of easygoing or cheerful person, I do turn in on myself, and I think all that violence is just a sort of reflection of that, you know. But not. I don't think it's gratuitous. I think you know that when people are in isolation, as a lot of people in lockdown were, there is a lot of self-harm, and the kind of mental problems which this pandemic is bringing out in all kinds of people, is something which you know is present in this piece, I think, and is quite relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a way it felt very personal, and that shift, yeah, it is personal. And you use the language of objects. You know, I always think that's what you do. You don't need words. It's through objects, and it's through how those objects are passed on, and the absolute, as you say, you know, Ankie, you say perfectionism. It is, you know, having seen you in a room, it has to be super precise. And sometimes I wonder, you know, of course that's for the camera and for the shot and the performative moment, but as you've just described, it's for other reasons too. It's for yourself. It's how you operate. It's how you cope.
But I also think, actually, now we're talking in this way, Julian, he does need an audience, and I had to be that audience in order for you to do certain things, because in the very last scene, when we are clapping, I actually am playing the violin outside of the house, and you can hear that. And when I came back in, remember you said, I had to do this on my own. He found that very difficult. He said, I had to kind of now do this whole thing. I was outside.
Well, that's very true. And Ankie also kind of gives me a good kicking sometimes. I mean, because I can kind of get too turgid and too slow and too stuff. And so quite often she kind of G'd me up and said, oh, come on, put something into it. So that is, yeah, that's an important thing.
No, it was a good cooperation, I think. It was good. You know, occasionally I had to storm out in the garden and have a stress cigarette, but apart from that, fine. Really. And I think there is a level of trust, you know, that you want to, you know, he trusts me to make it look as good as it can be with the camera so fixed on the low tea table, coffee table.
And also we're not afraid of telling each other things which, you know, I think, you know, if I'm working with a group of people I don't know, and they tend, and also when they're like 40 years younger than me, sometimes maybe don't say the things which they should say, you know, because because I'm a bit scary, and sometimes, you know, I feel that I'm not getting the feedback. I'm not talking about you, Taghrid. You're always going to talk to me. But you know, it does happen that Ankie's certainly not scared of me, and that's quite good. Say what she thinks.
Anything for art, really.
You mentioned, Ankie, the height, the level of the camera, and you said, I mean, I recall you once saying, oh, cheap IKEA table height. And then you likened it to filmmaker Ozu's technique, which is very low to the ground. It's kind of 2 to 3 feet above floor level. So can you tell us a bit more about that, about the camera operation?
As I was the one operating the camera by making it spin around, I became, of course, very aware of the limitations of the camera as far as the level of the height of the image it could take in. So it was almost like learning another language to realize where Julian had to be in order to actually be in the shot. That is why in some occasions when he's kind of standing near that window behind me, he has to kind of stand a bit like that, otherwise his head is not in the screen. And by following it around, where exactly he has to crawl on the floor or how you do that. So yeah, I found that for myself was an interesting experience, and it made me think indeed, you know, what it means, like in those Japanese movies, when you see everything from a particular low level that just stays constant and the camera never tips up or down.
I mean, the camera was, the tilt on it was fixed because we were doing the overlays. But also, I mean, because this isn't a gigantic space we're filming in, you can't really get sort of as far away from the camera as you might want to do certain things. So having a low camera allows you to get close-ups of people sitting down or doing something, a full, you know, someone on the ground, you can get the full figure low down and also get the standing figure further back. Whereas if the camera is higher, you either have the camera pointing down and you're missing the person in the background, or you're pointing up and you're missing the thing in the foreground. So it was about using the perspective that was available from a low camera.
But I thought what was really the nicest shot in the film is during the blind man bath, and the room that faces the street, and then he goes in the other room, and then he's in the patio. And I really love it, the way that he kind of, you see him going all the way in the back in his bare feet in the garden. And I really like that sense of distance that you can do that with the way the camera was set up. And you also see a bit of that in the barbecue, when you see people in the back and in the front, and it gives a really nice perspective to it, I think.
And Julian, you hunch into the frame. I think throughout your body is entirely dictated by its relationship to the camera, and I think it you know, we see how we watch Happy Days and we see how technically complex it is, but I think, you know, we can forget, you know, just how physical it is, how absolutely precise you have to map every chair in its position so everything can dissolve into each other, and that mapping. Tell us a bit about this process, about the average day of filming during lockdown and what you had to do to prepare for this endeavor.
Oh yeah, the scripts that you wrote.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're obviously, you know, if there's a shot where I am superimposed 3 times, the camera is programmed to do the same move 3 times, and I actually have to remember what I did. I mean, we were doing it with it was very low tech. I mean, we didn't go to a film kind of equipment company and get all kinds of fancy gear. We just had this rotating machine and a little tiny Sony camera. That was it. And it was complicated. We had the camera fixed on this table, fixed to the floor for like 12 weeks. And that was one of the nice things about the whole process, was that we didn't really have a time limit to it. It was sort of like endless, lockdown, endless. How long is this going to go on for? And so we weren't stressing about, oh, it's got to be finished by next week or something like that. We weren't paying anybody, you know, so we didn't have kind of financial kind of pressures on doing things quickly. It was very much just us two, essentially domestic lighting.
It was difficult though, because it was a very sunny lockdown, wasn't it, with the blinds. That's why the night scene was quite a good idea.
Mm. But yes, I mean, each scene had to be rehearsed and filmed and looked at and then kind of re-recorded, and we ended up, I mean, programming a lot of the camera moves after having rehearsed it, and so it was quite a laborious little process. But I mean, it's I think filmmaking is always a bit like that, isn't it? It takes
and the props and the continuity.
Continuity, yeah.
Yeah, 9 versions of yourself. Every film is like that.
Yes, so, you know, the furniture had to be on its marks on the floor, you know, that sort of thing. But that's nothing's changed. Editing it was a nightmare.
Yeah, you spent hours doing that.
Weeks. Yeah.
Wonderful. Would you want to add anything else before we open the floor to questions?
Well, I think maybe with the questions can allow us to talk more about it.
Yeah, 40 minutes have flown by, and I'm aware I have so many more questions, but let's open the floor and see where we get to. So I'll just wait for questions to come through the chat. So weeks of editing, so three months in total ish.
Yeah. I mean, well, 12 weeks of shooting, of filming, and we didn't do terribly long days, like, you know, because I would be editing or kind of also at the same time. So we'd go from like 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 or something. I mean, it wasn't, but it was quite
intensive.
But it's also quite relaxed. It wasn't like a kind of a major production schedule. It was. We had the time to think about it and develop scenes and try and think about what order they go in and how things fit together. I mean, there was never any script. It was very much a question of scenes, little ideas which turn into a scene, and then you think, that's a nice scene, but how does it join on to anything else? It was quite a lot of jigsaw assembly rather than a through narrative or a thing.
Peter Stickland wants to unmute himself.
Peter Stickland wants to unmute himself. So, Peter, you have to write a chat. You have to write a chat.
Have your daughters have seen it? What did they think about the collaboration? Were they freaked out by it, or did they find it hilarious? Or
I thought the dancing they thought was very good. Yeah, they were fine with it, really. Their old parents kind of sticking together, wasn't it?
So we've got a question from Katie Haynes, and she's asking, what would you like to make next with the rotating camera? And as we're perhaps about to enter a second lockdown.
Well, I mean, personally, I've already done a couple of weeks kind of workshop with Yoko in Toynbee, you know, with on the original Nowhere idea of filming a panning camera and then projecting through a panning projector onto the walls, and that there's kind of ideas that came out there I want to pursue. So personally, I want to do something that involves the projection as well as the camera. And where we would do that, I don't know. There's something very interesting about projecting an image onto the object itself. So you film a door and then you project the door onto the door, and then you have the option of either coming in the door that's been recorded or the door that is really there. You can have a set of relationships between the past and the present, which I think is interesting, which I think we should do. There's another kind of and sort of compositional thing going on there. There remains the idea that the original idea of Nowhere was to, and of Dissolved, that those video ideas were designed to make telematic connections between two locations, to try and create a space that was in a sense shared, so that instead of just having a Zoom conversation between remote participants, people would be inhabiting those remote spaces in some kind of relationship, superimposed or kind of alternating, but spatial. And so that remains the idea. And so we now have 2 rotating machines, because Nick has just finished building another one. And so we will be able to link them via the internet, if we so wish, and have synced cameras, synced projectors. The original idea never really got very far because of the lack of control, lack of time. The circumstances were very bad. Nothing beats having enough time and space, just mental space, to concentrate on something without distractions. And if we're having another lockdown, I think in order to stay sane, one of the things to do would be to concentrate on a project, you know.
Let's hear some more questions.
A question from Anya. How did you come up with all the characters, and which one was Ankie's favorite?
Well, he just had a couple of outfits, but I quite liked the big hat. I thought he was so sweet, really. But then you warmed to all of them in the end, maybe. But they were all behaving slightly differently, weren't they?
They were. Yeah. They were quite different from each other, and then sometimes so they developed their characters. I mean, the guy with the raincoat appeared to rescue the man in the big hat from because he was getting, you know, all he was communing with was versions of himself, and so there had to be somebody else appear to provide a real relationship. So the man in the Mac turns up and makes the other guy a cup of tea, and they share the tea and cut their hair and play games, silly game on the table with kind of toy animals. And then they gang up on the third person who butts in, and so they have a kind of relationship. But I think the guy in the Mac is he's a bit heavier than the other guy, but he's also more sociable.
Mm.
So the guy with the big hat is not.
He's a bit stuck up, really.
Yeah. But where they come from?
It's the three sides of your personality. Bit wild, there's the green man, and then the sociable one, and then the stuck up one.
This is gold. Judith Knight thinks it's brilliant you're working together, whether it's been caused by lockdown or not. Ankie, do you wish you'd worked with Julian before?
Oh, it would have changed his life, but no, I had my own work, 3 young children to look after. I mean, you know, that would have never been possible, but it is fair to say that I have contributed certain ideas to station house performances. You know, I've always been involved. I've seen every show, and I actually met Julian because I went to a show which was appropriately named A Split Second of Paradise in Amsterdam, and I actually met him by staying afterwards in the bar, and he was asking for feedback on his show, and I gave him some feedback, and I think you even incorporated that and got me free tickets to come and see it again. So the whole Station House Opera has been really...
Her feedback was negative. It was, and it's quite nice that, you know, you say, so what did you think? And they say, what was that about? Honestly, no, it wasn't totally negative, but you're pointing out, you're pointing at certain things which you thought were naff or something. But anyway, that's always nice, you know.
And you did it. You changed elements of the performance.
I can't remember.
Good.
I mean, it's taken us a long time to get to this point. I mean, you know, we've been separated 14 years, and that's, you know,
it's getting better and better.
Well, you know, it's had its ups and downs, and it's kind of it is interesting doing work together after all this time.
We never did work together, but yeah, no, it went well. It works well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really has worked well. And Roshi is wondering, will you collaborate together again?
It's like blind date where you see each other again. First.
It's not exactly a blind date though, is it?
No, but you know, like, they just say yes. Of course we will.
Of course we will. Yes.
It's vital.
But it is funny that it took lockdown to get us to that point. I mean, because we had a sort of we go through periods of not speaking to each other for months.
Yeah, that's also healthy.
We shall see.
Sorry, what did you say, Julian? The last bit, your internet cut out.
Nothing.
Well, your daughter Ruby asks what the best thing about working together was.
Just to get through the day, really, to make some structure to the lockdown. It was getting pretty boring. to do something creative. That was really good about it, I think, because like I play music, but always I prefer playing in groups, and when that falls away, you know, a whole outlet of your own creativity falls by the wayside. So I think that made it just makes you feel that you're doing something worthwhile, and you might as well as you're stuck home. I mean, I'm not a baker. I mean, could have taken up sour bread or something, but I didn't. So yeah.
Yeah, there was just too much sourdough, Ankie. There was too much anyway. I'm glad you did this instead of the sourdough.
Thank you.
It is. I mean, you know, we had one project once upon a time which was raising kids, and now we have another project which is making a video, and they're both things which you have to collaborate on and do. And so that's just that process is rewarding.
And you raised them very, very well.
Well, let's not go there.
In my opinion. Gary Stevens is asking whether you think the work combines angst with humor.
I wanted to make something just totally full of angst, but there's something in me that refuses to do that, and so I have to take the piss out of myself and do something funny.
It would have been unbearable.
And she's not into the angst at all, so it would have been unbearable. So yeah, you have to, you know, the humor is always there somehow.
What would it have been like, Jules? Just when you say you wanted to make something that was pure angst.
It would have looked the whole time like the guy in the chair who goes, you know, upside down. And I found that really difficult to even see that in real life, you know. That's disturbing.
And was that the initial idea in March, or did that come later?
No, that particular scene came much later, and again, you know, I approach, you know, these things from a sort of slightly formal direction. So I was thinking about how could somebody who is a double image, but totally on top of each other, totally synchronized, so you don't know it's a double image, you know, what are the ways of splitting into two images, you know, and so it just seemed, and so the splitting into two crazy people just seemed was just a way of going from a totally still solid image into chaos and back into something solid, and without any extraneous cause and effect or anything. And so obviously it comes from within, and it could have been comedy. It could have been, you know, Buster Keaton or doing it in whatever that film was, you know, it sort of but there were some bits of that in the video, and that scene was quite disturbing. It's quite disturbing to do, actually. It really shakes you up, but I think it's
a fair portrayal of lockdown, really. Mental health issues in lockdown for some people.
Yeah.
Miranda Payne likes the meringue scene. Can you tell us about that? Why meringues? How many did you use?
Well, we had to make two. He made 2 batches as well.
Well, Why?
Because remember the first time we shot the whole thing and the lighting wasn't right, and then we had to do the whole thing again.
Well, it wasn't in focus or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it was just.
It was part of Cocagne, wasn't it? To kind of have something really nice appearing suddenly in multitudes.
Yes. Yeah. So suddenly there's, I mean, cocaine, the Bruegel painting of cocaine, there's kind of food is presenting itself on your plate. A pig lies down on your plate with a fork already stuck into it, and all this, you know. So it's like it was sort of thinking about cocaine, but
the specific, the meringues.
Somebody asked me only about 2 weeks ago, said, "Is that from Magritte?" And then I had a suddenly terrible thought. Oh God, is that from Magritte? I thought I'd thought of it myself, but maybe after Magritte, I don't know.
Does he have a thing with meringues?
I don't know. He has a thing for loaves of bread and fluffy clouds and things like that, doesn't he? So
okay, well maybe it was an unintentional reference to Magritte.
They're little fluffy clouds in the house, floating around in the room. I don't know where it came from, really.
Well, that's the end of our. I'm okay, Tara. We've got 1 more minute, and maybe we could take this one. Tara Irani is asking, how did you come up with the smashing clay pots? It seems like a tricky one to improvise or rehearse. And how did you find sponsors for the pots?
I live next door to a pottery. So the potter, Romilly, gave us a whole sack of just leftover pottery.
Kind of rejects. So they were all.
We had tons of it.
Rejects
and we didn't rehearse it. We just did it.
Yeah. But where did it come from? I have no idea. Where did it come from?
Well, you did the road metal sweetbread. You smashed up a teapot there.
Yes, it's got history.
He has a history with hammers and smashing.
Well, you smash things. That's what you do.
That's what I do. I've got lots of smashed cups and saucers.
Yeah.
Rocks on my. So yeah, I suppose that is just recycling an old gag. But
it was quite fun to do because obviously I had to each time put a new pot exactly on the spot, remove the old thing. So it was quite a live action shot that. But of course you don't see that. But you know, it was a real collaboration, getting that rhythm going of the smashing and the replacing of the pots.
I mean, to me, it seems quite normal, quite reasonable to smash something up with a hammer. I mean, maybe that, I think you know, a cup or a pot or something has one function, and you put something in it, something that's very limited. But to smash it gives you two functions. You have the function of a smashed pot and a function of a pot that still works. And there's something rather endearing about that, I think. Quite fruitful. I wish I could think of something else to do with a pot.
Fruitful and satisfying. Well, thank you both so much. And thank you to everyone who has tuned in. The video will be available online for a few more days yet. So do watch it. I do encourage you that if you have watched it already to watch it again. I think the layers just keep revealing themselves with this one. Thank you both so much.
Oh,
thank you, Taghrid.
Thank you for everybody who's sitting out there, which you can't see, coming in and listening to this stuff. Thank you very much.